folks, as you can see, I'm not wearing a mustache. I somehow misplaced it. And so for this 2NR, Amanda will not have her signature mustache, but she is still Amanda in spirit. The order will be the terrorism disadvantage and then the cybersecurity advantage. As you can see, I'm not extending my solvency arguments. In the 2NR, I have to pick and choose what I think my strongest arguments are. And when I was going through and thinking about how I wanted to attack the affirmative case, I decided the solvency stuff was just not worth my time because the 2NR is a pretty short rebuttal. So I'm only covering terrorism and cybersecurity. And without further ado, let's begin. The plan increases the risk of catastrophic terrorism by denying law enforcement crucial tools in order to intercept terrorist communications. This outweighs the case. A is magnitude. Terrorists are increasingly dangerous. The internet has expanded access to scientific and technical knowledge necessary to create weapons of mass destruction, including things like nuclear weapons. Terrorists are able to build dirty bombs, which would kill millions of people if detonated in a city. Comparatively, a cyber attack has never killed a single person. B is probability. The risk of terrorism is on the rise now. ISIS has dramatically expanded their presence in the Middle East, and they're increasingly attacking foreign targets. Al-Shabaab, Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda, Hamas, all of these are terrorist organizations that potentially could pose a threat, and we need to be vigilant. Comparatively, the risk of a cyber attack, especially one from terrorism, is low. That's our Conway evidence. Now, they say, when has a surveillance ever solved a terrorist attack, and demand a specific example? But we've read evidence that says actually 50-plus attacks have been stopped due to NSA surveillance. Now, we don't have the details of those plots available to us, but that's because these security agencies don't want to tell terrorists how they are able to foil their plots. So we can't give you the exact details of a particular scenario, but what we can give you are the data, and the data are clear. Surveillance is absolutely necessary in this age of mass terrorism to stop attacks. Next, they say that there's a data overload, that we just have too much information. But having lots of data is not only necessary, it's actually good. Their analogy to the haystack doesn't make any sense in this context. We're not trying to find one needle in a haystack. We have a pile of hay with a bunch of needles in it, and if we only take one armful of hay and look at that, we're missing a whole bunch of other needles that are throughout the entire bale of hay. It's inevitable that we have to collect a lot of data. It's just a question of whether we can process it and get enough data so that we can make our discoveries more accurate. And even if they win this argument, they have mishandled a fundamental link argument that we've been making all along, which is that their plan is not simply about mass surveillance, bulk data collection. It's about targeted surveillance too. If law enforcement officials suspect someone of terrorism and go and get a warrant to look at their data and their communications, they're actually physically unable to do that in a world with strong encryption because those communications would be protected. They wouldn't be able to get in. That's why we need a backdoor in the first place. And even the affirmative themselves have conceded, they agree that targeted surveillance is useful and necessary to solve terrorism. They just haven't responded to the fact that they actually make that impossible. Now, they say that terrorism is not a big threat, but yes, it absolutely is. It's not just abroad, it's right here at home. And in fact, just last week, the San Bernardino shooting, that's an example of an ISIS attack on our soil. We need to have the ability to look at people's communications to stop attacks like that. And there is a possibility of nuclear terrorism. Yes, it hasn't happened before, but our evidence is actually very well qualified. We're citing a study from the Harvard Belfer Center that looks at tons of data and says that in places like Russia, there's loose nuclear weapons that terrorists could easily steal, or places like Pakistan. The technological expertise the barriers are just not as high as they used to be. And terrorists do have the motivation to do so because it would be a very visceral, very high-profile attack that would make them look like they were able to inflict damage. Cybersecurity advantage. They say that a cyber attack would turn the terrorism a disadvantage, but this would assume that the whole grid would collapse and shut down. It also assumes that terrorists would actually be able to take advantage of encryption holes in cybersecurity, which they just are not able to. That's our Conway evidence. I'm only going for the impact arguments on this page. It's numbers 3 and 4. Cyber attacks are hugely exaggerated. There has never been a successful attack that has been both long-lasting and widespread. That's our Healy evidence. And moreover, cyber terrorists do not have the tools or expertise or the motivation to try and carry out a cyber attack. That's Conway. They have basically conceded this argument. The only thing the affirmative says is, oh, well, there's state actors like North Korea that could potentially carry out attacks, but they have no evidence that talks about any states. Their only evidence is about terrorist organizations. So when is this coming? Why would they do that? They have no evidence to back up any of those claims. I also extend that their authors exaggerate. They have a financial incentive to make the threat seem bigger because there's a whole industry surrounding the combating cyber attacks. And last, there will be no grid collapse. There is zero chance that a cyber attack could take down the entire U.S. electrical grid for an extended period of time. It's not interconnected like that. That's just not how the grid works. That's Miller.